today we are on day, I have to look it up, 11. Yeah. Amazing, amazing. We still have, we have this beautiful Sunday and 5 more days coming up next week. Until the actual day of miracle, the big highlight. And today we have another highlight of these days of miracles, Geshe Kelsang Wangmo. We are so happy that she's joining us in her very, very busy schedule. And I think most of you are familiar with Geshe. So Geshe is originally from Germany and then joined in the early 90s an institution in Dharamshala, just next to the Dalai Lama's residence. It's called Institute of Buddhist Dialectics, and studied there for 17 years, I believe. Geshe, please correct me if I'm wrong. And then got, as a first woman, the Geshe degree in 2011, I believe that was. And since then, quite a few Tibetans pulled after, Indians, Tibetans from the Himalayan region. I think in 2016, there was quite a few new Geshe-mas, but Geshe is still the only Western Geshe. And unfortunately, I have to say, will be so for quite a long time. There's not so many coming yet, because it's quite an amazing, amazing path. So we are so very happy to have Geshe today with us. You might have seen her already yesterday translating for Yangten Rinpoche. And today we will have a teaching from Geshe directly. Thank you so much, Geshe. And we are so very honored to have you back. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Kumbhila. Well, before we start, of course, I think you're all familiar with the procedure of, a Dharma talk. Of course, it's considered very important to set our motivation. So let's do this together in the form of a meditation. So to think that may our coming together here today help us to develop a better understanding of who we are and of how to transform our mind, how to practice in order to be able to reduce our harmful states of mind, our harmful emotions, and replace them with constructive ones, such as love, compassion, wisdom. And in that way, may today become a cause for us to actualize our fullest potential. Not just for our own benefit, but also that we can help others to do the same. Okay, great. So having set our motivation, well, what is the topic? The topic I'd like to talk about, and it took me a while to decide on what I wanted to talk about because there's little time. But I decided on talking about, selflessness in daily life. Of course, I feel after what Rinpoche taught yesterday, there's no need for me to say anything further. I mean, it was such an amazing teaching. And if you didn't, you weren't able to receive those teachings, you weren't there, well, please listen to the recordings, because it was amazing. Rinpoche taught in such an amazing way. And of course, the text is so beautiful. Well, anyway, so when I talk about, the topic is to selflessness in daily life. What is daily life in this context? Well, daily life, of course, life in the 21st century. And let's face it, it has drastically changed from the time of the Buddha, from even just 100 years ago, 50 years, 100 years ago, very different. And so we are faced with a challenge of applying the Dharma, if that's what we want to do, if we want to train our mind, and that's what the Dharma is really all about, mind training, training the mind. Well, we're facing a lot of challenges. Most people don't live in what is called the conducive environment for the Dharma. There are kind of two conducive environments, if you like. One is, of course, to live in a retreat somewhere away from the hustle and bustle of life, modern life, and to engage very focused in meditative practices. The other would be in a monastic setting. So in a monastery, for instance, or in a monastic institution, well, students of the Dharma, well, you learn the Dharma, you study the Dharma, but students of the Dharma are undergoing a very rigorous training revolving around study, debate, prayers, so that the mind is immersed in the Dharma in such a way that sooner or later, Buddhist ideas, they rub off on you. They have an effect on you. However, especially nowadays, most monks and nuns in those monastic institutions, well, they don't stay in that institution their whole life and basically have to face the modern life, the life of the 21st century. And in fact, if you look at the countries where there are these monastic institutions, mainly India, Tibet, some Nepal, they're described as developing countries in the hope that they'll develop in the same way as the West. So they become like Western, modern, progressive countries, well, materially progressive countries. And so sooner or later, this environment, this conducive environment for the Dharma, well, it will change to such a degree. Well, it's already changing now, less monks and nuns and less places to meditate on, less interest in meditation and so forth, so that we really need to find a way to bring the Dharma into our daily life. And a lot of people do this already in modern life. And I'd like to say a little bit more about this. And I hope I'm not preaching to the choir, because, I mean, let's face it, most of you do face the modern life. I mean, live in the modern life, and you face the challenge of bringing the Dharma into it. But I think it's really important to be very aware of some of the challenges, but also the advantages, and utilize the advantages for Dharma practice. And of course, be sure to avoid or even overcome the challenges. So one great advantage is definitely science, if we utilize it in the right way. So science, more specifically, scientific findings, especially in the areas of quantum physics, neuroscience, psychology, that verify many of the Buddhist concepts. Nowadays, you just need to Google Buddhism and science, and you find, well, a lot of material on the findings of, well, the benefits of meditation, for instance. There's a whole new discipline called contemplative science, which investigates the benefit or the beneficial effects on meditation, mindfulness meditation, meditation on compassion, visualization-based meditation, and so forth. So that is, I think, an aspect, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama, in his wisdom, has definitely understood this already many years ago. About 30 years ago, His Holiness started to connect with scientists, and that has led to disciplines such as contemplative science, to scientists like Richard Davidson, who was very influential in the US and in other countries, due to his research on meditation, on the benefits of mindfulness meditation, compassion-based meditation, etc. So that is very valuable, and we didn't have that 100 years ago. Well, even just 20 years ago, we didn't have these different disciplines. Also, to a certain degree, our life has become easier, to a certain degree, less time consuming, because we no longer have to go out and hunt animals or work on the fields to grow the grains we need to bake our bread. We can just walk into a supermarket and get what we need. We get water from a tap and no longer need to draw it from a well. However, despite that, we're so busy, busier than we were ever, so that a lot of people are too busy even to get enough sleep. So there's the benefit on one hand, but of course our lives are a lot busier. It's much harder to bring the Dharma into our lives. Also, we have a lot more freedom. Again, in certain ways, we have more freedom. We have the freedom to vote, depending on where we live, choose a profession, choose who we get married to, or choose not to get married, choose our religion or to be non-religious. But at the same time, we're a lot more dependent on physical comfort. Can't do without certain things in our daily life. And we have also less freedom when it comes to our emotions. I would argue, maybe not everyone would agree with this, but our emotions, especially our negative emotions, have definitely grown stronger. I feel stronger than in the past. We're exposed to a lot more emotional stimuli that are emotionally more intense. Like if you think of some of the movies or video games, more violent, more scary, more erotic, and so forth. So craving, desire, they're increased through these media. And of course, there's advertising. And I've read somewhere that every day, whether consciously or unconsciously, in the modern life, we're exposed to 5,000 different types of advertisements, whether it's on the online or through newspapers or just walking through a street. Most of them we don't notice, but they have an effect on our mind. And those, at the very least, what they do is create or train our desire, create more desire, train desire to want new things, even before the old ones have been entirely consumed. So we're up to very strong emotions, also aggression, aversion, well, envy, of course, too, very high. We live in a very highly competitive world. So these emotions that are actually harmful are increased by the environment we live in. We're a lot more distracted and less attentive. So modern daily life means, well, a lot of distraction, a lot of inattentiveness. The amount of children suffering from ADHD, that is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, has drastically increased. And I think if we compare us to the people 100 years ago, we all suffer from some form of ADHD. Not surprising. I mean, all the distractions. I mean, most people carry a smartphone with a lot of diversions, attractive features, information at a swipe of your fingers, entertainment, and so forth. And also, there are a lot more humans on this planet, and we're actually a lot more connected through the internet, social media, etc. But still, loneliness is on the rise. We feel more separate, more isolated from each other. And this is definitely because we have become a lot more self-centered, more individualistic than before. So on one hand, there's more affluence, more wealth, more affluence leads to greater self-reliance. We don't want to really rely on others. We want to be independent. And we live in a society with a lot of emphasis on celebrity, on appearance, and even on narcissistic role models and leaders. Another problem is we're driven by perfectionism, by the desire to avoid failure or critical judgment by any cost. Perfectionist tendencies have actually increased substantially among young people over the past 30 years, regardless of gender or culture. And greater academic and professional competition is thought to play a role, but along with this pervasive presence of the social media and this harmful social comparisons that it triggers. And in general, modern life functions on the basis of materialism, on this increasing craving to consume ever more. So it seems to be totally in contradiction to the Dharma. many of what I just said, and that's just a tiny bit. Those are the challenges of the 21st century. So they seem very much in contradiction to the Dharma, to mind training, the way it is explained in the Dharma. And it becomes obvious how much it is needed, how greatly mind training is needed just to be able to cope with everyday life. All right, so what would be the first step? What is it of mind training? Which aspect should we start with? There's so much. We're up against so many challenges, so many difficulties. And there's only one good news. And maybe this became obvious yesterday if you attended Rinpoche's teachings, that this, if we apply mind training in the right way, this is the perfect time. Because especially mind training, as explained yesterday, and really Buddhist practice is all about this, requires adverse conditions. The harder is, the more creative you have to become in order to overcome these challenges, the more beneficial it is. So sometimes in the scriptures you find like an allegory, an example of, for instance, an analogy, if you like. So the analogy of our mind being similar to a rough piece of wood, a rough piece of wood that's covered with all sorts of stuff, or like a crystal, if you like, any kind of material that requires polishing. Now, some of the roughness on that crystal or piece of wood, what have you, if you just take a little bit of cotton cloth and you rub softly over it, well, it's not going to do the job. It's not really going to clean and polish this object. You need something hard. You need something rough to actually remove the stains, to remove what's extra. And therefore we crave, when we think of Dharma practice, we think of getting into some kind of beautiful hut somewhere in the mountains with a beautiful view and everything is pleasant and wonderful. And if we can't accomplish that, perfect conditions for mind training, well, at least we want to be in a Dharma center or in a monastery where everyone is peaceful and loving and little Buddhas are floating around and making us feel good. And of course, that's not going to happen. That is like trying to, form a piece of wood into something, or cleanse it, whatever analogy you want to use, by using just a soft cotton cloth. It's not going to do the job. Nothing is going to happen. So in actuality, modern life with all its challenges is perfect. It's perfect because it enables us, well, to practice patience, to practice mindfulness. It enables us to, well, understand the shortcomings of materialism. It's right in our face, and so forth. But the first step to that is definitely meditation, or the practice on mindfulness. Now, a lot of people feel in Tibetan Buddhism, mindfulness is not really not important, which is not true at all. It's considered very important, but the Tibetan tradition, especially when you study the Dharma, it spends a lot of time explaining things a lot more. It explains things more, that like aspects that are extremely difficult to understand. The meditation of mindfulness is more like, well, there's explanation given, but you learn by doing. There's a lot more emphasis on learn by doing. It's explained, of course, and then you just do it. And in that process, get better at it and understand what to avoid, what to foster, and so forth. But to say a little bit about it, well, scientifically, we have a better understanding of the practice of mindfulness. And please, there's a difference between mindfulness and mindfulness meditation. So here I'm talking about mindfulness meditation. Mindfulness meditation has, well, scientists have found that it has very many immediate benefits, even if you just practice a little bit. Greater attention and focus, of course, a greater sense of feeling connected, It enables us to control our negative emotional impulses better. So being less controlled by harmful emotions. And it helps us to overcome these negative emotions more quickly. It makes us more resilient in that way. On top of it, we learn to become more selective in what to focus on. I mean, in what to let in. I mean, in what to focus on in our life, to not get overwhelmed by the information overload, by the overload of, well, emotional stimuli and so forth. But that is just what scientists have found, and that is totally true and important. But even more important when it comes to the practice of mindfulness, and like I said earlier, there's a difference between mindfulness and the meditation of mindfulness. Mindfulness is just a function of the mind. Every mind has a function of mindfulness, but that can be advanced to our benefit. Needs to be advanced, can be advanced. And this training, meditation on mindfulness, is really this enhancement, this increasing this mental function and utilizing it as a foundation for Buddhist practice. So from a Buddhist point of view, therefore, it helps to lay the ground for Buddhist practice. But what it also does, immediately, what is so important, it helps us to become more relaxed and more laid back. Because there's definitely a reason why the Tibetans were great candidates for practicing the Dharma. When the Dharma came to Tibet in the 8th century, it was brought from Tibet to India, from India to Tibet. Well, it was able to thrive among the Tibetans. Was preserved by the Tibetans and, well, developed in the sense that just as there were highly realized masters that developed in India, well, there are many highly realized masters who developed in Tibet, generated realizations on the basis of Dharma practice. But the reason that was possible because Tibetans were so laid back and still are pretty laid back. So this is something we learn through mindfulness meditation, become more relaxed, more laid back, and to be less harsh with ourselves. This whole perfectionism kind of thing we're going through, well, it reduces that sense, become less harsh with ourselves, more accepting of our own failings and our own shortcomings. And it also helps us to step back from our mistakes, our shortcomings, to not identify with them, to feel like I am my mistake. So to instead acknowledge what we still need to work on, our negative emotions and so forth, to learn to even laugh about them, because they're quite funny at times, to laugh about them, acknowledge them, understand them better, and in that way, well, instead of suppressing them, learn from them. But as I said, there's a difference between mindfulness and the meditation on mindfulness, and there's also a difference between meditation on mindfulness as opposed to meditation on concentration. Of course, we need to be focused when we engage in mindfulness meditation. So, like I said, we have that basic mental function, and now we need to apply it. That is meditation on mindfulness. But it's not just about focusing the mind on the single object. It's not about stopping our thoughts. Mindfulness is not opposed to thoughts, or the training in mindfulness is not opposed to having thoughts. It's actually this process of focusing on something. So if it's on the breath, that's something that takes place all the time. So it's pretty easy. Easy in the sense that you don't have to search for an object outside of yourself. Or, and this is where our daily lives comes in. I mean, we're doing a lot of things in our daily life, and we hardly ever pay attention. We are hardly ever really mindful. So to pay attention to exactly what we're doing, which as we do it right now, scientists have found that we're happier in that process, just being fully focused. So it puts our mind at ease, at rest. And again, with that kind of relaxed state of mind, it is much easier then to, well, start to practice what I describe as selflessness. All right. So therefore, focusing the mind on that, but that's still not all, because mindfulness, that's just the first step of mindfulness, of the practice of mindfulness. It also involves the process of recognizing thoughts as they arise and bringing our attention back to what we're doing right now. So either breathing or whatever else we're doing, bringing the mind back. So it's not just focusing the mind, but recognizing thoughts without being carried away by them, without being carried away by our emotions, being controlled by our emotions, but rather to watch them, become aware of them, and gently take the mind back. And in that process, we learn, of course, about our thoughts. I mean, we learn to notice them, maybe even spend some time just watching them, if that works out. Usually then they disappear when we focus on them, but learn more about our thoughts, but in that process also distance ourselves from them, from especially harmful thoughts, harmful emotions, and get back to whatever we're doing. So get back to breathing, or we're cleaning, brushing our teeth, and so forth. So that's the first step. That is the basis for everything. But then the actual topic I want to talk about today, and this was a long introduction talking about, well, daily life as such, but selflessness, that is really the topic I chose. And selflessness, I really like the word selflessness because it has two meanings. It has a everyday kind of meaning, and it has a philosophical meaning. Selflessness, according, for instance, to the Oxford Dictionary, it means concern more with the needs and wishes of others than with one's own. That's not how we think of selflessness in the Buddhist context. Cambridge Dictionary says, like, the quality of caring more about what other people need and want than about what yourself needs or wants. So it's much more about, it's selflessness in the ordinary context refers to the opposite of selfishness, selfless, putting others' needs first. Of course, implied in that is compassion for others, love in the Buddhist context, as it's described, the wish for someone, a feeling of closeness and concern, an affection, wanting this other person to be happy. That's love. And compassion is, again, that sense of concern, affection, and care for another person, and wishing that person to be free from suffering. And that is summarized in selflessness as it's described. So this quality of caring more about what other people need and want than about what I myself need and want. But not because I'm suppressing myself and I'm ignoring myself. No, out of a deep sense of love and compassion, a very natural, peaceful state of mind that it just comes natural to it. So that's one meaning of selflessness. But in the Buddhist context, that's not how the word is used, usually, at least not in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. It's rather used as the same as no self. So the opposite of a particular self, which actually doesn't exist, but that we mistakenly perceive. We perceive of a particular self that is actually impossible. Therefore, there are two selflessness. There's altruistic selflessness, as explained in the Oxford and the Cambridge Dictionary. And there is the view of selflessness. And those two are strongly connected. So saying selflessness in daily life, I want to talk about these two factors and how can we bring them into our daily life. despite the challenges, despite all the difficulties. And so, first of all, I would claim that all of Buddhist practice, everything in Buddhism is included in those two, can be included into altruistic selflessness and the view of selflessness. Now, if you've learned about Buddhism before, you would agree with me, because this twofold category of including everything into those two, well, we've heard this before, method and wisdom. Oftentimes Buddhism is divided into method and wisdom. So altruistic selflessness is part of the method aspect of Buddhism, and the view of selflessness is part of the wisdom aspect of Buddhism. But another way to divide Buddhism, or to say that everything is included in those two, is the view of dependent origination. So everything in Buddhism can be divided into the view of dependent origination and the conduct of non-harm or non-violence. Sometimes the Dalai Lama often says that Buddhism can be described in that way: the view of dependent origination and the conduct of non-harm. The view of dependent origination is really the view on selflessness, looking at it just from a different angle, from a different perspective. So the view of dependent origination. And the conduct of non-harm really refers to selflessness in a more, well, slightly extremer version of not just refraining from harming others, but putting others' needs before our own. And then, of course, there's this way to talk about Buddhism as to the two aspects of bodhicitta and the wisdom realizing emptiness. So selflessness taken to a different degree. But basically, bodhicitta, it's a type of selflessness. It's implementing selflessness, and the wisdom realizing emptiness, of course, is just another way of saying the view of selflessness. So these two, there's no surprise that you have these two aspects of Buddhism, that we say all of Buddhism, all of Buddhist practice are just different states of mind that we train ourselves in. So all of those can be divided into those two, this more emotional or method aspect and the more rational aspect. And the reason for that is that there's these essential two aspects of our own mind, the two parts to our mind, two aspects to our mind. There's the cognitive aspect and the emotional aspect. So the cognitive aspect relates to the intellectual activity of our mind and refers to our mind, refers to the way our mind perceives things, perceives ourselves and the rest of the world. And the emotional aspect is just the emotional response to that cognitive aspect. So the way we perceive things, that triggers a certain emotional response. And these two, this cognitive aspect of a certain way to relate to the world and this emotional response, is the basis of both samsara, our existence right now, existence with a lot of problems, with a lot of unwanted experiences, and nirvana, which is the state where we're free from such. So the basis is the same. There's a distorted version of the cognitive aspect and the emotional aspect, and there's a non-distorted version accounting for, well, one for samsara and one for nirvana. And Buddhist practice really revolves around replacing the distorted version of those two with the undistorted version. Okay, so that now brings us closer to the two aspects of selflessness, because basically, what is the distorted version? The distorted version is, in particular, when it comes to the self, the distorted version of the cognitive aspect of our mind is a distorted view of ourselves and of other phenomena, but mainly of the self, existing in a very concrete and findable way, which gives rise to a particular emotion, which is selfishness or self-centeredness. Perceiving a certain I, a particular self, beyond what's actually there. Which of course is not to say that I don't exist and the self doesn't exist. Yes, there is an existent self, and that has to be emphasized over and over again. I mean, the word selflessness seems to imply there is no such self, or the word non-self seems to imply that. But here self refers to a distorted view of the self, of giving the self or ascribing certain characteristics to the self, to the existent self, which is impossible for it to have. So it's impossible for the self to have these characteristics our mind ascribes to the self. And because of that, because our mind automatically perceives there to be more than there actually is, a very concrete self that seems to be findable. That then, because of that, there's this emotional response, and the direct emotional response is self-centeredness, which is a type of attachment to the I, considering this self, this I, this self to be more precious, more important, holding on to it, and holding on to not just as it being more important, but also its well-being being more important. That's the emotional response. And that emotional response then gives rise to other emotions such as aversion, craving, greed, envy, and so forth. It actually also comes with this unrealistic sense. So the self-centeredness, the self-cherishing or self-centeredness, as I just described it, this attachment to the self, it also comes along with this unrealistic sense that I'm more important, better than others, need to be better than others, should be faultless, and I shouldn't fail. It's actually totally unrealistic and actually impossible to keep up. That's why it's so tiresome to have self-centeredness. It drives us to create this image of ourselves that's just so exhaustive to keep up. And there's always a sense of insecurity. It makes us vulnerable. And there's a sense of foreboding. It may crash any moment. So this sense of I that I develop on the basis of that skewed, that distorted view, that keeps me from being truly happy. So as long as we have this self-centeredness, we cannot be totally at peace. Mentally, we cannot be at peace. That's why we say our existence right now is in the nature of suffering. Of course, first of all, the circumstances we find ourselves in are a result of the mind of self-centeredness. But even that being the case, if I were to remove that self-centeredness right now, I'd be at peace. So the worst suffering, the worst type of problem that we have is that of a mental type. And we really crave that more than anything, this mental well-being, lasting happiness, a sense of satisfaction. And as long as we have self-centeredness, impossible. So we need to get to know this self-centeredness better. Self-grasping, which is, of course, that distorted view, of course, but that is more difficult. If we remove that self-centeredness, if we remove that self-grasping, if we remove the self-grasping, which gives rise, which is this cognitive aspect of our mind that is distorted and leads to this emotional response, which is first of all self-centeredness and then other emotions. If we remove that, so if we remove that cognitive aspect that's distorted, we remove the emotional response, absolutely. But that's not easy. Which is why Buddhist practice consists of those two. Working towards totally removing that cognitive aspect that is distorted, replacing it with wisdom, but also in the meantime, reducing our self-centeredness, reducing it. Totally eliminating, we won't be able to unless we overcome the distorted cognitive view that gave rise to it. But in the meantime, what we can do right away and immediately is reduce it. We can reduce it. we can work on reducing it. And that helps us in the long term to understand selflessness. So in turn, it helps us to reducing the self-centered mind, helps us to generate an understanding of the self, how it really exists. And in that way, generate an antidote to the cognitive aspect that is distorted, that perceives an unrealistic self which doesn't exist. And then, of course, totally eliminates our emotional response to it. That doesn't mean we lose emotional responses. No, the distorted aspect, the distorted kind of cognitive aspect will be replaced now by wisdom and understanding of reality, which has the emotional response of love, compassion, care, affection, altruism. Okay. Now, how do we go about it? How do we actually go about this? In this daily, in this life, well, the life we live in the 21st century. Well, the first step is to learn about it. Now, His Holiness the Dalai Lama very much emphasizes the 21st century Buddhist should learn about the Dharma. But if you don't know Tibetan, you're not aware that the word His Holiness uses for studying the Dharma, when His Holiness speaks in Tibetan, is not the same. It's not the same word that is used when you talk about someone studying in school. They're different words. The word for studying in school is lobchung in Tibetan. So lob kind of means to train, to study. It can also mean to teach. But here, as part of the syllable of studying in school, really means to train, to study. And then jong, the second syllable, means to cleanse, but it also means to train. So it's kind of like study and train. Like, and it really means like to just, well, how do you study math? How do you study history? To gain a better understanding of the facts and then put them together and so forth. But the Tibetan word for studying the Dharma is a different word altogether. It's tösam. So tösam consists of two syllables. Tö, it's kind of like listening, receiving the information, and sam means to contemplate it. So the Buddhist studies usually says like when someone says, well, what is this person doing? They're doing the studies in the monastery. You use the word tösam, which doesn't mean you just receive all the information, but right away you contemplate on it. You contemplate, you reflect on it, you take it deeper. You take it onto a deeper level. And actually, what we sometimes call meditation is that second part of it. So not just receiving the information, but reflecting on it. It's actually a form of meditation. Then people get confused because you have this term, listening, contemplating, and meditating. So the sense that meditation is something totally different. Like you do the tösam part, tö as in like listening to the teachings, receiving the information, and sam as in contemplating, reflecting, and then meditation is something totally different. Well, meditation as part of those three, that is different. That is advanced. It's an advanced type of meditation where you bring together a very advanced state of meditative concentration together with an insight. And with this union of calm abiding, or union of this concentrated state and this insight into something, you deepen your understanding. That is a very specific and very advanced type of meditation. That type of meditation we can't easily do. So that's not the same meditation, not the same type of meditation when our teacher tells us, well, meditate on it, meditate on mindfulness, meditate on love and compassion. That is, at the very beginning, we can do that. So if in the modern world, we study the Dharma, don't study it like just getting the information, try to understand it and right away apply it. Whatever you learn, try to apply it. And sometimes that's difficult. And we have to learn a way in which even indirectly we can apply it. I mean, we may not be able to directly apply it, but the knowledge we gain explains why love and compassion make more sense, and that we try to apply. But the point I'm trying to make is that Dharma study does not refer to just learning the facts, because this in Tibetan, it's a different word. That's a different type of study altogether. But rather to listen to it, well, with your heart. It's a really weird way of talking, but it's again utilizing those two aspects of the mind. Utilizing the cognitive aspect, but also the emotional aspect. So what do? First, you study it, you learn it, and then you reflect on it, until you get some emotional response. That's usually when I guide an analytical meditation, for instance, which is this form of reflection or contemplation. I say at the end, whatever insight you've come to, whatever emotion really has arisen, focus on that. So you want some emotional response, at the very least, this, I don't know, what's it, a eureka moment, an aha moment, right? It's like, that kind of, it moves you from deep within, right? This kind of like, oh, wow, right? Being this, I don't even know how to describe this emotion, how to put it into words, but it's this kind of like, oh, wow, that's it. That's so true. This kind of sense of conviction. And that really affects our actions. So you have the analysis and then this kind of emotional response. In this wholeness, the Dalai Lama, I don't know whether you've noticed this. I mean, I'm sure the translator has translated it. He also says this very often. He doesn't use the word emotion because there's no real word in Tibetan. There's this word for feeling. So he kind of says, you meditate on it until a feeling arises, until there's a tsaw. Yeah. And then that's usually not explained, but you kind of move. There's much more of an emotional response. Well, I shouldn't say there's no word in Tibetan. There is a word in Tibetan, but it's not as commonly used, and His Holiness doesn't use that word. It uses more the word for feeling. Anyway, all right. So having said all this, the process, etc. Now, can we do in this life, in our daily life? Well, what we should focus on initially, the easier part, and that we can much easier initially bring into our daily life, is the practice of reducing our self-centeredness. And well, mind training texts are the perfect texts to actually do this. Perfect in the sense where they require the challenges of modern life, adverse conditions. So definitely that is given. And they're so universal. I mean, if you learned about yesterday, I mean, don't expect a reward, don't be boastful, and so forth. So many different aspects. I mean, mind training texts, this one book, Mind Training, that was, I think, translated by Geshe Thupten Jinpa. Not sure he translated all of the different texts in it, but you have all these different texts. And when you read them together, some of them have a commentary that's also been translated. You see that's still applicable. I mean, there are certain examples like Zo and yaks and every now and then, animals that we may not know, but you can easily transfer that. And once you understand the meaning, it's not difficult to see that this is universally true. So mind training texts are extremely beneficial. But how do we actually start? And I think one problem we have is that when we first recognize self-centeredness, and not just when we first recognize it, when we recognize it all day long, we generate aversion. So to reduce our self-centeredness and to replace it with a more altruistic selflessness, or reduce it with altruistic selflessness in that sense of altruism, well, that also needs to be directed at ourselves, because aversion is a huge problem. Now, oftentimes people think anger is such a problem, but the Tibetan word that oftentimes is translated as anger is not anger, it's aversion. I meet people sometimes who say, I don't have any anger. I don't get angry with people. But anger is a much stronger emotional response to something unpleasant. But aversion is different altogether. Aversion is some kind of dislike and just frustration and not liking, or just this kind of being averse to this person. And it includes not just others, this aversion towards others, but also towards ourselves. And that is a huge obstacle. Aversion is an obstacle to any type of altruism, any type of practice of altruism. So altruism also directed at ourselves. Compassion, care, love, acceptance, directed at ourselves. So aversion for self-centeredness, it's already the main obstacles. We automatically push it away and we no longer work with it. So mindfulness, I said, was the first step. And then recognize recognize self-centeredness when it arises. And instead of acting or reacting with aversion, instead a sense of acceptance and curiosity. Acceptance, curiosity. And as we do that, then, okay, I don't want to have this self-centered mind. This is not going to help. All right, let's just apply an antidote, right? But this is different. It's not like we have aversion towards it, but it's more of a recognizing and then applying an antidote. And sometimes just recognizing it and focusing on it makes it disappear. Okay, so that's definitely one of the first steps to avoid aversion. Aversion towards other people, aversion towards ourselves, we really have to be at the lookout. Resentment, just this kind of like, and I think we all have that. Even we may not be an angry person, we don't come across as an angry person. I mean, aversion is such that it doesn't trigger this kind of angry response. I mean, maybe our smile fades, but that's the worst that may happen. So avoid aversion, be at the lookout, be mindful of aversion. And then, well, we now want to overcome slowly. We want to replace this self-centered attitude, just putting myself first, with cherishing others. But there's steps to it. We can't do this immediately. We can't immediately go from being self-centered the way we usually are to being totally altruistic. There's steps to it. I think the first step is what His Holiness calls wise selfishness or selfish altruism, where we actually have an ulterior motive, where we understand if we put others' needs before our own, and we don't really do that, but we're kind of changing our habit. It's not really effortless. It's fake, if you want. But we're changing, the wiring in our brain, because due to neuroplasticity, that's totally possible. So science tells us it's totally possible. We can change our habits. We can change the wiring in our brain, if you like. And meaning we can change these kind of set attitudes. First, to think, others will like us more. We will have more friends. We will have cordial relationships with our colleagues if I put others before myself. So we always see there's some benefit. And this is not to be underestimated. That is wise selfishness. That's better than our stupid selfishness or not selfish altruism, but selfish self-centeredness. I mean, stupid self-centeredness, really. So we put others before ourselves. We try to. Like I said, I think it was once Geshe Dorje Damdo who said this, like when we take these first steps, it's like trying to dance a ballet while wearing a spacesuit. So it doesn't come naturally and elegantly. I mean, I don't know, I've never worn a spacesuit, but any kind of weird clothing, maybe a few down jackets, and then try to dance, I don't know, Nutcracker or whatever these different ballets are called. So that's how initially our kind of effort, or how our wise selfishness, or our selfish altruism will actually be like. It will feel to us that way, and it's difficult. It doesn't come effortless. But also, we should reflect on the interdependence. So not just the benefit we get directly in that way that people become our friends, but also our interdependence, which takes it a little further. We're all connected with everyone else. And it's a bit like the logic of the healthcare system. When we're concerned with others getting infected with corona because they could infect us. So the sense that the happiness of other beings, the well-being of other beings has an effect on me because I don't live in a bubble. And then slowly, as we continue doing that, we grow more familiar with that. We feel better. We feel better when we engage in selfless actions, which motivates us to continue. But at some step, none of this is important. We just do it because it's the right thing to do. And if then our understanding of how the self really exists, if that deepens, there's a sense like there's no other way than to act selflessly, to act altruistically. Why? Because it's not in accordance with reality. It doesn't make sense. And so we're not concerned with any kind of reward. It doesn't matter people like us or they don't like us. It's the right thing to do, and we do it. And we're not dependent on anyone's response. And in that way, we just do it. And inner peace is the result of that. It comes from within. It's not dependent on how others react. So that is what we're working towards. And the best form of altruism, the highest form of altruistic selflessness, is really the one once we understand the self doesn't exist the way it appears. But let's move towards that aspect of selflessness. Because as I said, if we reduce our selfishness, that emotional response, the emotional response, selfishness or self-centeredness, that is the emotional response to our misapprehension of how the self exists, if we reduce that, we focus less on I, me, and mine. And if the focus is lessened, we realize even without it, it all works. It works perfectly. I haven't thought of myself for the last 5 hours, and I'm still there, right? You engage in effortless actions as through you getting used to it. Like you get used to it, you get more and more used to it. And you have these moments where you totally forget about yourself, and it's others before anyone else. So you put yourself into the other person's shoes, which is the first step, of course. And I haven't mentioned that yet, but I will. So you put yourself into the other person's shoes, and there is no more divide between you and the other. And for 5 hours, you've just been there for others, and you're still there. So initially, when we think of selflessness, there's a fear of losing ourselves. We're not losing ourselves. We continue to exist, but we realize that the self that our mind made up was never there. And without this view of the self, we function much better. Without this made up view of ourselves, everything works much better. And like I just said, I went through the steps of selfish altruism or wise selfishness, whichever you want to call it, whatever you want to call it. I think wise selfishness is probably a better word. So we start off with that and then slowly increase it. But what are the means to doing so? Well, to focus on the other person, to focus on the other, to put ourselves into the other person's shoe. We will not experience what the other person experiences, of course not, but we can get a sense of what they're going through. So for instance, we often come across when someone does something to us and we take it personally. We take it personally. What does that mean? We feel it's directed at us to harm us. Right? That's like taking it personally. Someone does something to offend us. But oftentimes we find if we really analyze the situation, we put ourselves into the other person's shoes, we realize it wasn't about us altogether. It was about them. Maybe they were in a rush and that's why they pushed us away. They wanted their coffee really quickly because they had to get to an appointment. So they were like, give me that coffee, right? They were rude. But it wasn't about offending us. There was a situation that concern them. So oftentimes when we take something personally, it's all about me, me, me. The whole world has gotten together to hurt me. But it's not about that. The other person wasn't thinking of me in that moment, didn't want to offend me, but rather was busy with their own problems. So oftentimes when we just take something personally, that's just one example, of course, but that's very much part of, well, our culture, taking things personally. So to become more aware of the other person in that situation, how did they feel? And of course, if we can, in all situations, to try to familiarize ourselves to putting ourselves into their shoes. And we do this definitely right now with the people in the Ukraine, for instance, what they're going through, what we see on the news. We put ourselves into their shoes and it's like, wow, may they be free from this suffering. So we can all do it. Oh, if it was me, if it was my house that was destroyed, if it was my grandmother who was killed, and so forth. So we can actually do this. We do it all the time. We're quite good at it. The only thing that stops us from doing that is our self-centeredness. If it's too strong, we have a hard time doing this. So make an extra effort, put yourself into another person's shoes. That's empathy. That's just the first step to try and feel what it's like. Compassion is then the wish out of a feeling of closeness, of feeling close towards this person, because you put yourself into their shoes. You've known them, you've gotten to know them better, you know more about them, even though that's not exactly in accordance with reality, but you get a sense of it and it's not unrealistic. And then due to that closeness, you have the wish, may they be free from that suffering, which may motivate you to do something to remove the suffering. So compassionate action. Okay. But of course, all this is most effective if we understand the self better. And that is selflessness in the philosophical sense. And that's not easy. Most of Buddhist study directly or indirectly concerns that, because it's so hard. Because the cognitive aspect of our mind that misperceives, that has a distorted view of ourselves and others, it's so deeply ingrained. It's so deeply ingrained that it takes time, a lot of effort to overcome it. But again, everything I described before in terms of dealing with self-centeredness, this emotional response, reducing it, well, you can learn more about it in the mind training texts. And wonderful, we live in a time when there's so many challenges. This is the perfect place to practice this. But how about practicing a better understanding of selflessness, of how phenomena really exist? That is much more difficult, but not impossible. Not impossible. We just need to, well, make more time, I would argue. Initially, I said we have a lot less time. We are more busy. We are more distracted. Well, check your busy schedule and see whether there are some changes you can make. Because different to the other practice of bringing altruistic selflessness into our daily life, well, you just need a few obnoxious people around you and perfect, right? A few difficult colleagues, difficult family members, right? And then you spend some time with them and retreat. Probably need some time off, okay? Spend some time with them and retreat. And while you're on your own, while you withdraw a little bit, you kind of work with it, you go through your conversation, you go through it, and then, okay, again, seek some encounter as far as it goes, and then withdraw. I mean, we don't have to be with them all the time. So withdrawal is not escaping. It's rather taking a break when it's necessary to, get back to being focused, to be determined and so forth, and not to be crushed. So it's a constant back and forth, but still plenty of opportunity in daily life. But selflessness, as the view of selflessness, for that, we really need some quiet. But does that mean we have to go off in the mountains and meditate? Well, that'd be perfect. Of course, take some time off and do some retreat. Great. Wonderful. If you can, take the opportunity. But even if you cannot, do not ignore it. Do not feel, my life is too busy, I've got too much. No, selflessness, next life. You don't know what's going to be next life and so forth. So it could be much worse than it is right now. The opportunity will never present itself again. Do it right now. Do not ignore it. Make some time for it, right? And even if you, I don't know, do it on the toilet. I mean, like if you spend 5 minutes on the toilet, and you do it then, check, where's the self, where's the I? Of course, I would recommend to make more time, but if really, that's better than nothing. And that's 5 minutes more. Okay, so I'm exaggerating a little bit, but the point is, make some time. And then there are so many beautiful reasonings. There's so many beautiful books on that. And I just want to mention a few things of just taking the time. And you don't, if you find meditation uncomfortable and so forth, well, if it's the posture, I'm talking about the posture, is meant to help you to settle the mind better. And if you're in a lot of pain and you can't sit like that, well, by all means, sit in a different way. The way you sit is not important. What's most important is that you have a certain degree of concentration. So your spine should be straight because, well, you're less likely to be sleepy. But other than that, be comfortable and then take a moment. Where's that I? If my self-centered, my emotional response, self-centeredness is holding onto an I, a certain type of I. I mean, really, when we think I, there seems to be something, first of all, non-changing. There's a sense like the I of this morning and the I now, they're the same, right? So do you get that sense of an unchanging entity? The I that switched on Zoom and logged in, and the I that's still listening, that's the same. There's that sense. First of all, how could that be? If the body has changed, the mind has changed, how could it be the same? And where is it? Where is that I? Can I locate it somewhere in my body? Can I really locate it? Like, can I pinpoint where it is? If I had some new scientific method where I could, without any pain, take my limbs apart and spread them in the room. Okay, so not to be gory and disgusting to cut off limbs. No, if there was some scientific method where you can just place your different limbs in a different place of the room, where would the I remain? Where would be the I? If you were to lose parts of your body, would that diminish your I? Okay, so the I in relation to your body, it's definitely, in terms of where it is located, somewhere here. And most people point at their heart. Okay, there's a reason for that. But without going into that reason, most people point at the heart. But does it really feel like I am located somewhere in my heart and I'm kind of looking up at my head above and my belly below? Does it feel like I'm really inside my heart, kind of, hi brain, hello up you there. Oh, how's the digestion going? I see Suliana going up and down with her head. Anyway, so the point is therefore, it feels at times that way, but at other times it feels more like the eyes between our eyes, the eyes that look out in the world. And then at other times it feels like it's in my foot. You know, if someone who's got like some dirty stuff on their fingers were to touch my foot and it's all dirty and disgusting, I feel like, oh, they just contaminated me. And it's like, now suddenly my eyes on the foot, I've been contaminated. My eyes moved all the way down to my foot, which is why I'm saying I've been contaminated, right? So there's this, how does it feel? Just analyze it. And the best time, of course, and we heard this many times, but we usually don't do it, when there's a strong sense of I, when someone praises me greatly or criticizes me greatly, when someone accuses me falsely. I mean, come on, modern work situations or even being in the Dharma center, this happens. Great opportunity. And if you can't do it right there and then, go to the bathroom and do it there, right? I mean, withdraw. I'm saying don't need to go to a bathroom, but I'm saying go to your room, be on your own, and just kind of sit with it. Okay, how did this feel? Okay, I felt like very strongly. So where's this I? Instead of we going on about this person and how they've done this and they've done, you know, even when we withdraw. But no, okay, let it go for a moment. We get back to you, okay? But Where was that I, right? Where was that self? Okay, just try to be relaxed about it and just curious and okay, what just happened? That's a great opportunity. We have to take the opportunity and be appreciative of someone giving us this opportunity. How often, I mean, it doesn't happen all the time, but when it happens, great opportunity. And if it doesn't happen too often, imagine, visualize it happens, and then analyze. But there are other aspects. So searching for the I, can we really find the I? Can we find it? The search, you've heard about this. And of course, you never find anything. I mean, let me tell you right from the beginning, and you're probably aware of it, you don't find anything. But that's one approach, definitely one approach. And you can read about it. What is the I? Is it one with mind and body or separate and so forth? So all this you can do. But there are also other ways to look at it, because really what we perceive when it comes to the I, but also with regard to other things, is the sense, okay, we know we have a concept of a self and we have a concept of other things. A concept just means we have a thought, I, and we have a thought, car, and there's a thought, room, other person, pen, and so forth. But the question is, do we have a concept of a self because there is one, or is there a self because we have a concept of it? You see the difference? Is there a concept of a car because there is an actual car over there existing in and of itself? Or is there a car merely because there's a concept? Because we have a concept of a car, is there therefore a conventional car because we have a concept of it? To us, it feels like it is the first scenario. It feels like there is the thought of a car because there is an actual car. And we just happen to see it, to think about it, and develop the concept of a car. So there is this sense of objectivity, that there's this objective world out there, and I perceive it as it is, and then develop these concepts about them, these thoughts. I have these thoughts about them. And sometimes they're realistic, but many times they're unrealistic, but many times they're also realistic. So there's this objective world out there. We don't have a sense that everything we perceive is actually subjective. And that not just that the car, it's because we have a concept of a car, because we label on the basis of certain parts, we label car, therefore we can say there is a car. That's how the car exists. And it doesn't need anything further to exist. There's not more to it than that. And that is so difficult to understand. And I know I don't have much time left, and that's why I'm kind of racing a little bit through. But I'm saying we live in the 21st century. We have scientific understanding, which can really help us greatly. After what I said, let's think of what modern science, modern physics has taught us about perception. If we have a sense, the objects are these objects out there, not to do with my mind. This is how it feels. And like I said before, we have this cognitive way, there's this cognitive aspect of our mind. That is how we see the world. And there's an emotional response. This is how it feels. We are convinced. So this emotional response is also this deep sense of conviction. And that governs our actions, by the way. That governs our actions in everyday life. I haven't even mentioned actions, karma, and so forth. So it governs our actions and leads to suffering. So governing our actions, it is this deep conviction that governs our action, this emotional conviction that governs our action. So if you check, how often did you have a thought when someone says, oh, those are beautiful curtains? And you feel like, oh, they got a weird taste. Oh, how can someone like these curtains and say they're beautiful? What does that mean? It means it seems that there is this objective beauty over there. And either you have a good taste or you have a bad taste. right? There's an objective beauty over there. Beauty, we intellectually feel, yeah, beauty lies in the eye of the beholder. But that intellectual understanding is not deep enough to trigger an emotional response, right? To then be convinced, oh, this person is really off in their taste. They got a horrible taste. That shows we have a sense there's something objectively over there, beautiful or not, blue, round, I don't know, objectively a piece of music and so forth. Now I'm saying science, I'm mentioning science. What does science tell us? Blue. Let's say there's this beautiful curtain. You're very attached to your blue. Well, it seems a weird color for curtains, but anyway, you know, you're attached to your blue curtains or a blue dress, whatever. Oh, this beautiful blue. Actually, there's no blue over there. There are just light waves that, in combination with our retina and parts of our brain, it leads to this subjective and unique appearance of blue. There's no blue out there. So we label blue onto an object, and it feels like it's in this object, within the object. It's the object from its own side is blue, and I've got nothing to do with it. I have a sense it's got nothing to do with my mind. But scientifically, we know it has everything to do with my retina, my brain. And then, of course, my retina and my brain don't perceive blue. There's just a certain chemical process and physiological process that takes place. The unique experience of blue is found in my mind. And so then I label blue onto that object, which is not blue. It's got light waves, and that's it, right? Similarly, when we perceive sound, they're pressure waves. So a piece of music, they're just different pressure waves, which trigger my eardrum, the vibration of them. And this beautiful piece of music comes out. And I'm labeling beautiful piece of music. Do I find the music out there? No, I don't. I love how smells work, because we usually in the analysis, we stop with music. We stop with auditive objects. But what about smell? How does smell work? Right? If I believe this beautiful smell, this object smells so beautiful, it seems to be within the object. It is actually molecules separating from the object. They're no longer with the object. And they enter our nose, the receptors in our nose, and that triggers some response in the brain, which leads to a certain experience of smell. Very subjective, possibly very different, my experience than the experience of another person, because they have different receptors. Maybe different, the molecules act differently, who knows? I mean, with animals, that's definitely the case. I mean, the smells they prefer to us, it's pretty obvious that they don't have the same kind of perception of smell than we do. So it's all dependent on all these factors. And then we label smell, a certain smell, when in actuality, actually what happens is that there are many different aspects of these molecules that trigger different receptors, and the combination of all those, they're identified as a single smell. So you see how your mind is very much part of this process, very much this perception that is totally subjective. And then it gives rise to the thought. First, it's just the experience of whatever is triggered by that coming together of a molecule that has separated from an object and so forth. And then there's the thought, smell. And that is the mind labeling. It's just thoughts. Thinking, this is such and such, this is this and this. So just from there, we can see that how we perceive the world as if this blueness, beautiful blue sky. Oh, I'm so attached to the blue sky after, I don't know, the winter, that just the January, February rained a lot where I live. And then now I see the blue sky. Oh, it's not there. That blueness is just a subjective experience. Okay. And then labeled, of course, as blue as the sky, labeled by my mind. And again, modern science, we need to really make an effort. So first of all, to reflect on these aspects. Take some time when we read a book. Also check, what does science say about exactly that? When we read a book about the Dharma, for instance, about emptiness, So perception of the outside world, what the science tells us, and then bring it together with this. And we don't need to do much, but really allow this information, give it some time to think about it. So instead of maybe surfing the net and watching endless news for hours, right? Which is a form of entertainment. And unfortunately, it's really not like we need to have all this information. We don't remember an hour later anyway. So maybe reduce it and make more time for this kind of analysis. What do we perceive? What is this procedure? So we perceive things. And then there's the thought, this is this. This is blue. This is the taste of honey, and so forth, right? This applies to all the five senses. I mean, I've just given you examples. So work with how does first of all, how do these senses, how are they explained by modern science? And what does Buddhism say? We can bring the two together. There's no contradiction. Buddhism doesn't explain the physical happening. It just describes the experience by the sense consciousnesses, the sense awareness, and then, of course, the conceptual aspect, the thoughts that arise from that, which then label, which then designate, this is this is that. And when we say everything is labeled, then it's really just saying everything exists. Everything that exists because there are thoughts about it. Thoughts create reality. So there's the thought, this is blue, this is yellow, and so forth. This is not what the eye consciousness and so forth experiences. It is the thought afterwards, which then enables us to talk about it, to think about it, and so forth. Beyond that label that is applied by our thoughts, you can't find yellow, you can't find a car, and you can't find a self. So going back to the self, there's a sense there's something there. Definitely. There's a sense there's something there. Let's look for it. But that's not all. When we talk about our sense of identity, a sense of identity, what is that sense of identity? And that is important. We're not saying that we don't need a sense of identity. We need a sense of identity, but not one that exaggerates what's actually there. One that is aware that our sense of identity is just a constellation, it's just a coming together of different thoughts. It's the coming together of different thoughts. I'm this, I'm that, I'm a woman, I'm a parent, I'm a nun. And these thoughts, they're not random thoughts. It's not like I'm an orange and now I'm an orange. That's ridiculous. Or I'm an elephant. No, that doesn't make me an elephant. We label our sense of identity are certain thoughts with regard to ourselves. So it's not just I. There's also I'm like this, I'm like that. It goes along with certain characteristics. But none of these characteristics exist beyond being labeled independence on other things. So for instance, I'm a woman. I'm a woman. I feel strongly about being a woman. Okay, I'm a woman. I'm not a man. But my womanness, can it be found? No. There's certain parts of my body and a way of thinking on the basis of which I label woman. That's it. Or I'm a daughter. Now, on the basis of the fact that I'm a human being, I have a human body, I label human, and in relation to my mother, I label daughter. Is there any daughterness that can be found other than me labeling daughter, independence on my human body, and in relation to my mother? No. A nun, in relation to the fact, independence on the fact that I have a body and I've taken vows that I'm keeping, I label none. Is there any nonness to be found anywhere beyond those? No. it's labeled in dependence on that. And who am I as my sense of identity? It's these thoughts in relation to this independence on that. I label, and I label correctly. I can label incorrectly. If I hadn't taken any vows, and I would now say, oh, I have a human body, and I believe in the Buddha, so I'm a nun. That's not a correct labeling. I don't have a basis on which I can label because there are no vows. I haven't taken any vows. So in order to be a nun, you must have taken the vows and not broken them, and not given them back or not broken them. Okay, so that is the basis. That is what we define a monastic person, like a monk or a nun. So if you're female, call it nun. If you're male, you call it monk. Okay. So therefore, based on how we define things conventionally, and then if these characteristics, these defining characteristics are given, I can say, I'm a nun. So I label nun. Beyond that label, I don't find any nunness. I find vows. Okay, if I were to find these vows somewhere, if I could actually, because they're not really findable, like I don't know, like a pimple or something. But anyway, so if I could find these vows, if I were to be able to find them, that's not me being a nun, right? But then if I take those vows, they're also merely labeled on the basis other than themselves, on a certain defining characteristic, right? So again, they're just labeled. And the defining characteristic of their vows, they're also just labeled. So in the end, there's nothing intrinsic objectively there that can be found. It is just labeled. Even the labeling mind is just labeled. My thoughts are just labeled on the basis of other thoughts, on moments, on the basis of certain moments of thoughts, I should say. Okay. So anyway, I'm just checking out time, and I've already spoken for an hour and a half. So most people, well, if you're busy, please, of course, just log out anytime you want. But I could take questions now. Is that all right? I've spoken for enough, for long enough. So I hope I have not confused you too much. So really, just briefly to summarize what I talked about before, talked about so far. Well, daily life in the 21st century has a lot of challenges, comes along with a lot of challenges. We should be aware of these challenges and not feel deterred from still practicing the Dharma, because this can actually, especially in terms of mind training, many of these conditions have become adverse conditions that are actually conducive. They can be perfectly utilized to be transformed into practices or methods to the path of enlightenment. On top of that, scientific understanding is very beneficial. It can be complemented, it can be utilized to explain, definitely give us a better understanding of how phenomena really exist. And in that way, however busy our lives are, there are many times throughout our day where we can actually practice mindfulness, practice cherishing others or altruism. And of course, take the time to reflect on the self, to reflect on how I exist. And really, Buddhist practice can be summarized into those two aspects: method and wisdom, or altruistic selflessness versus, and the view of selflessness, those two. So hopefully I've been able, in this very short time, I've been able to give you some impression how to apply selflessness in daily life. All right, and now I'll take questions.
Thank you so much, Geshe-la, for this very, very inspiring talk. Thank you so much. And the first question is from Jordi. Jordi, could you unmute, please?
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I can no longer hear you. Jordi, can you?
Like, I understand selflessness, but I feel like often my reaction to that is, how do we like get our quote unquote needs met as like a self, and kind of, develop our sense of self, to have that strength in the same time of being able to be selfless. Does that make sense? So it's kind of like, I understand the selflessness part, but then often what I hear is there's too much focus on others, and then we feel tired within ourselves or don't have that sense of self that's strong enough to be able to meet others. Does that make sense? With authenticity?
Yes. I hope I didn't. Well, there was a part when there was a time when I couldn't hear you, so I hope I didn't miss anything. But you were basically saying that sense of selflessness. The problem with that seems with well, first of all, denying a certain existence of the self, plus the emphasis on others. There's danger of neglecting our own needs such that we remain strong and determined and have self-confidence and so forth. Is this what you're asking? Is that your question? Okay, I just assume it is. All right, let me just see whether, yeah.
That's what I'm asking. Correct.
Pardon? Did you say yes?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. Okay, so that's a very good point. But the problem is selflessness can easily be misunderstood. Of course, we're not saying that the self doesn't exist. So that has to be stressed again and again. And the emphasis on others, well, it starts, of course, with love and compassion for ourselves. And I kind of mentioned that briefly, but in this context, well, I want to emphasize this again, that it's extremely important because we don't even have enough love and compassion for ourselves to actually be able then to experience it for others. So we want to be happy, but the only happiness we actually give ourselves is this very short-term happiness, very superficial happiness. We're not really seeking, our mind is not seeking some kind of lasting happiness. And when we talk about actual compassion and love for others, we're seeking this lasting love and compassion for others. We're not talking about short gratification. So that's the first step. Therefore, an acceptance of who we are. We do focus initially a lot more on ourselves, but since the topic was a different one, so this was left out to a certain degree. But we start off with focusing on our own self. So who am I? In the sense of, without even going into selflessness, like the view of selflessness, but just who am I? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? And with a sense of acceptance, there's strength and they can be enhanced, but they're weaknesses and they're okay. Yet, although they're okay and I accept them for now, there's room for improvement. So in that sense, that acceptance and closeness towards ourselves and having a sense, I deserve to be happy. I deserve long-term happiness. This short-term gratification, just a little bit of enjoyment here and there, I mean, it's exhausting. I have to run from one enjoyment to the next. I mean, this is really what our life is all about. One food has been eaten, now I have to rest. Then I have to get to this, the next, and I have to move. Then I have to do this. So we're constantly just seeking gratification outside of ourselves. We're never making an effort to really seek for lasting happiness that comes from within. So we're not loving ourselves enough. The kind of happiness we want for ourselves, that's not actual happiness. So it starts with that. And then if we deserve that and we have the wish to attain that, well, others do too. And we're very much part of the same organism. So I don't live separate from them. Everything I know, everything that I learned because there are others, because there are other people, there are roads, because there are other people, there are supermarkets, because everything I enjoy that makes my life easier is there because of others. So therefore, their well-being is my well-being. So I'm not ignoring it. It's just sometimes when my self-centeredness is very cheeky. It's very cheeky. So we're so used to just thinking me, that when it comes in and it kind of tries to suggest to me I'm doing this very altruistic practice, well, then in order to go from one extreme to another, I put more emphasis on others, just to kind of get more into a balanced state. But in actuality, when we learn about Buddhism and selflessness, it's about the welfare of all sentient beings, and that includes myself. I'm not leading everyone to enlightenment. I attain enlightenment with everyone else. And so the emphasis on others It's not to say to ignore my own needs. It's only at times, and that's usually like when the emphasis is more on my well-being. So to reach this more of a balanced state. But once I've reached that, it's equally myself and others. Okay, so I'm not neglecting that. And with the selflessness, we're not denying the existence of the self. We're denying a self that has never existed. That's impossible. If that self existed, I mean, we couldn't even move the way. And that's important to understand, because for us, the existent self and the self that we are trying to deny are just the same. We can't separate them. That's like trying to eat food and trying to separate the taste of salt and the taste of the food. It's you know, especially initially, it's difficult, or the taste of water and the taste of salt in the water. But slowly we can learn, oh no, there is the aspect of the self that does exist, and that is the one that doesn't. And the perception of the one that doesn't exist, that's causing all my trouble. That's the troublemaker. That's really responsible for all my trouble. Right? So selflessness is our friend in that sense. But like I said in the very beginning, we need to learn more, and slowly these questions that are very natural and important questions will be answered, not just in the way I answer them right now. At some point, you yourself come to an understanding about this, but it just takes time. Yeah. All right.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
Sure. All right, next question.
Stella, could you unmute yourself?
Hello, good morning, Kelsang Wangmo and everyone. Thank you so much for the precious teachings.
Sure.
I've met you 3 years ago in McLeodganj. I'm very happy to hear you again. I'm from Brazil.
Okay,
And
you look
thank
familiar.
you so much for the teachings.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
I want to ask about, in terms of practice, what would you
Yes.
suggest when we try to find a sense of self and we kind of have the feeling we've found some sense of self? The practice should lead us not to find, right? And what to do in terms of practice when we have the feeling, wow, that's me, and what should we do?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's great. You find something. Okay, so you feel like you find something. But what is important is when we say I, that sense of self-centeredness, is that the same I than the I you found? That's the question. What did you find? Did you find that I that you hold on to and you find is more precious, and it's the I that's being hurt? For instance, I had no time to talk about this today, but for instance, we say, he hurt my feeling, right? So if someone insults me, there's a sense they hurt my feeling. So what feeling was hurt? Where's that feeling? What feeling was hurt? In what way hurt? Is it kind of less strong? Is it not as strong as it was before? And if my feeling was hurt, how was I hurt? How's that hurt? Where's that hurt? And so we'll find it's very difficult to pinpoint what feeling was hurt. How do you hurt a feeling in the first place, right? Destroy it? It's not there any longer. So we never give it the time. We accept hurt my feeling and we make a big thing out of it, right? Hurt me, hurt my feeling. So if you come up with a self, all right, myself is, I don't know, whatever it comes. Is that the self that feels hurt when someone insults you? And usually it's not, it's different. We're looking for that self. We're looking for the self attachment to which causes our selfish actions, causes craving and greed and anger and all our other harmful actions that arise from those, right? So check first, is that the same self, right? And usually it isn't. Yeah. And then if you, whatever you find, well, what makes it myself? Am I saying this is my body? Is that which you find really the owner of your body? Because we're not denying the conventional usage of the word I, my body. So what you find, is that really my body? Or I talk about my mind, even the subtlest type of mind, I'm saying my mind, my, as it's called, the clear light mind, right? Which is not active right now. So am I not there? A lot of people say, well, it should be the clear light, that essential mind that arises at the moment of death and so forth. I mean, for those of you who are familiar with the Dharma, it's like that is described as the Buddha essence, the Buddha nature that transforms into the mind of a Buddha. Well, it's not active right now. The I is very much active. So how could that be the I? And that's not the one that's telling me this person insulted me, they hurt my feeling. No, that's not that I either. So therefore, first of all, there's no way in which that can be the I. And secondly, that is not the object of our self-centeredness. Does that make sense? Great. Next question. Are there any questions in the chat?
I'm checking Geshe now.
No.
Anybody has any question? I think, Geshe-la, everybody's digesting.
Okay. All right, digestion is fine. I'm just trying to get myself to organize. All right, so, well, are there no further questions? Everything's clear about the self and selflessness and so forth.
Maria has a question. Maria,
Right.
could you unmute, please?
I'm having some trouble with this. Oh, okay. There you are, Maria. Hi.
Sì, buongiorno, grazie. Volevo chiedere, quando siamo in contatto con le altre persone, li ascoltiamo, quando hanno dei problemi, io ho un po' di difficoltà a bilanciare quanto stare dentro di me per non invadere l'altro e quanto stare completamente a suo servizio e con l'altro. Volevo sapere se poteva darmi qualche consiglio.
Grazie. Maria Venerable Suyana, how do we do that now?
Non parlo inglese io, no, non parlo bene.
Okay, Celiana, can we put Celiana so I can hear her?
Then we take everybody out of the interpretation channel. How does that work?
Oh.
Maybe Chris, is she speaking Portuguese or Italian?
Va bene,
No,
grazie.
Italian.
Allora,
Italian.
quando
Then maybe-
ascoltiamo gli altri che hanno dei problemi, io mi chiedo quanto stare dentro di me per rispettare l'altro e quanto stare completamente con l'altro per farlo sentire insieme a me nel
Maybe Italian recorder can help us to translate.
Yeah, I have no idea. This didn't occur to me that this.
Yeah.
Maybe if Geshe-la goes to Italian.
Can I go to Italian? How do I go to the interpretation?
Yeah.
Okay, I go to the Italian.
Yeah.
All right, now I'm in the Italian channel. Celiana, could you translate? Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. All right, now I'm back. Can you hear me again? Yes. So for those who didn't change to the Italian, so the question is, when we're with other people, So how do we balance like our problems and the problems of others? How do we balance those two? How do we get not overwhelmed by the problems of others? I hope I understood this correctly, right? So when we're with other people, not to be overwhelmed by their problems. Well, I guess it's helpful in terms of what are problems in the first place. This is again our sense of reality. Not only do we believe that our self exists more concrete and exists as something permanent and concrete, whereas in actuality it's just labeled. That is also true for problems. Problems are not as solid and concrete as they seem. They come and go. I mean, the problems other people have, they're changing all the time. Of course, they may continue, but that doesn't mean they continue in the same form, and they will not continue forever. And so if we believe there's something really concrete and substantial, and now as I'm generating compassion, I'm taking them on and I'm now carrying their problems, well, then I may feel overwhelmed. But problems in the end, certain situations, we label them problems. We may also label them challenge. In the end, in and of itself, there is no problem found. That doesn't mean that they are not there and we don't experience them in that way. Of course, and other people really suffer from them. But then when we generate compassion, there is an understanding that these problems are changing, won't be always there, are not as solid as they appear. And then based on that, the wish, may they be free from them. May I be able right now, to the best of my ability, maybe just listen to them. I'm not able to remove their problems right now. I mean, not even a fully enlightened being can do that, but I can do that much. I can maybe just listen to them, show them my love, show them that I care for them. And so without being able to take away these problems, there's something I can do. If I know them personally, at least, I can give them my time. I can give them my care. And generate, of course, the thought, may they be free from this problem, like these aspirational kind of prayers, if you like. It's not saying that these prayers really reduce the problems right away, but because we're all connected and we have a connection to certain people, that may actually help, even if just an indirect way, that slowly they find a way to solve this problem and so forth. So problems, of course, are complicated in terms of the causes that gave rise to them. But the fact that they have arisen from certain causes indicates that they're permanent. Plus, they're labeled on the basis of certain situations. We label problem. We really search for this problem. We don't find it. What are there? Painful emotions. Yes, they're there, but they come and go. We have sometimes painful emotions, painful sensations, and then there are pleasant ones and happy sensations. So people go through these changes as well. And so dealing with these problems really means generating love and compassion, a real sincere sense of care and closeness. And I think this is the way we can really benefit people, but we won't be able to take their problems. Like I said, not even another person. So if we think we take on their problems, it doesn't actually happen. We do some meditation to that effect, but that is just a visualization that is very beneficial to the mind, but it's not really taking on the problems of others. So I hope I've been able to address everything, and I hope I didn't confuse you more, but you're actually not taking on the problems of others. Does that help? But think about it further. I mean, I won't be able, I would have to spend more time with you talking about this and what is the nature of problems and yeah, and how does compassion really manifest, how to apply compassion. But the thing, our problem sometimes is, the problem we have is we want to solve the problem. We find we have a hard time not being able to, we live in this world, like I mentioned this before, where when there's a problem, we want to solve it. And part of compassion also for ourselves is having patience with our own selves and understanding, well, there are a lot of problems, we just can't solve them. There's very little we can do. And the only option that Buddhism is giving us is really to aim for reaching the state of becoming a Buddha, because then we're most effective. We can actually guide others out of their problems. And then we still have the problem whether they will actually listen to our guidance, whether they will actually listen to our advice. But that is the best we can actually do. And even the Buddha has to accept, well, he or she cannot take the suffering of sentient beings, only show them how they can remove it themselves. Okay. All right. So what time is it? 10 more minutes? Well, not really. 10 more minutes. And if there's another question, I'll be happy to take one more. And if not, then let's conclude this session.
I can't see another question right at this moment, Geshe-la.
That's fine. That's fine. Okay, great. Okay, I've gone on for more than an hour and a half anyway. So all that's left at the very, oh, there's one more question. Yoga Ram, please go ahead. Unmute yourself.
Good morning, Geshe-la. I just wanted to understand if you would suggest one practice or one or two key practices which we need to start doing it every day to understand our mind or to train our mind. What would you suggest as a starting step for beginners like us?
Okay, I would suggest mindfulness, the practice of mindfulness. And there's a lot of material. There's a lot of reading material on that. I would start with this practice, but at the same time, start learning about the Dharma in whichever way you want to do that. Receive teachings, for instance, when His Holiness the Dalai Lama gives teachings, or other qualified teachers, or reading books, right? Or join a study class, for instance. So don't just do the practice, but also if you're interested in the Dharma, learn about it, and whatever you learn, try to internalize it, but focus initially on the practice of mindfulness. But I mean, on the other hand, I mean, just that, at the same time, I mean, there are also practices on love, on compassion. There's so many different practices, so there's no need to focus on just one practice. I mean, mindfulness is a very good way to start, but there's a good book, for instance, How to Meditate, which very beautifully explains kind of simple meditations that we can all do, analytical meditations. I wouldn't restrict myself to just one method, right? Because our mind is very complicated. Our psychological makeup is really complicated. So kind of applying certain different techniques, dealing with, of course, attentiveness in the form of mindfulness, dealing with love, dealing with anger, kind of meditating on love, compassion, and so forth. So it's totally up to you. If you feel it's overwhelming, it's too much, and your life is already full as it is and stressful, well then, like I said, mindfulness would be a good way to start. But then when you're open to new, because it's so rich, there's so much the Buddhist scriptures have to offer. So I would then take it from there. Okay. All right. Good. There's so many methods, someone just wrote. So many methods. How do you remember all of it? Oh, you don't remember all of them. You don't have to remember all of them. Just whichever you see, yesterday we went through this text, and one of the advices that was given in this text was, well, check whichever of your afflictions, whichever delusion is the strongest, and focus on that. So if you feel, well, I've got a problem with anxiety, I've got a problem with depression. I mean, those are not afflictive emotions as such, but they're still emotional states to which they're antidotes, or anger, aversion, attachment. So focus on that. And then as you learn about the Dharma, of course, it's important to learn about the Dharma. I don't remember all these techniques, but it's just a process. Oh, this is what I need to do. This is what I need to focus on. So what methods does the Dharma offer me? So there's some kind of research. It's kind of like when you have a physical problem, an illness, for instance. So of course you can go to see a doctor in the form of a Lama, for instance, but you can also do your own research. So what kind of diet helps, what exercise would help, and so forth. So in a similar way, what are the symptoms of this emotion? How does it arise? So through mindfulness, first of all, get to know it better. And then as you learn about the Dharma, it becomes very quickly, it becomes obvious, well, love, compassion as an antidote to aversion, also as an antidote to depression, and as an antidote to fear, etc. But more than that, and there's actually very little that you need to remember, like the essential practices, some of the essential practices as described in the Lam Rim. And they're not that many. It doesn't take that long to learn about them. But you then learn, once you've gone through a text like the Lam Rim, for instance, you learn which of those techniques now to apply, which meditation, which familiarization to now apply. Anyway, it just depends how new you are to the Dharma. So of course, if I think of you as like, I don't know how much you've done. In the beginning, it seems overwhelming, but you just start somewhere. I did, right? You start somewhere. I mean, we start our study. When I first studied, it was like, oh, whoa, what? People study for 20 years? Are you kidding me? Oh, no way. So I just started somewhere. I wasn't thinking too much about how much it is and how long it's going to take. I enjoyed doing it. So I take a little more and a little more and a little more, and yeah. And there's still so much more. Okay. All right. Now it's really time to stop. Okay, so let's take this last moment. All of us as a group, we've come together here, spend some time together. And let's now dedicate whatever positive potential we created today as a group. May that not become lost, but may become a cause for us, well, to understand selflessness, the view of selflessness, in order to be able to develop sincere altruistic selflessness. So deep love and care for ourselves, but also for others. And in that way, actualize our fullest potential. Not just for our own benefit, but also for the benefit of all others. But may what we've done today, may this not just cause us to actualize our fullest potential in the future, but even right now, may have an effect on this world, on the people around us that we're all connected to, in particular with regard to the suffering of the people in the Ukraine right now. So may this become a cause for this suffering to be reduced, in particular in the form of the decision makers. May they develop more wisdom, more love and compassion for others, so that they stop this war and instead bring peace to this region. Okay, thank you very much. That's it. Have a great day, be well, and maybe see you again.
Thank you so much, Geshe, for your precious teachings, making them so applicable to our everyday life, so practical, down to earth. Yes, we always love listening to you, bringing high philosophical concepts right here, right now to this, to us, to the heart. Thank you so much, Geshe. And we hope that we can welcome Geshe very, very quickly again. And hopefully Geshe-la will lead us in more studies. I'm thinking of the basic program still, the Heart Sutra course we requested 3 years ago. Yes, Corona came in between, and now this year will be still in between, but hopefully we can start in the near future at Tushita again.
Yes.
Up on
when I return to Tushita, when I return to India, when it's all over with Corona, I return, and of course I'll teach that course.
Thank you so much, Geshe-la. Now we have many witnesses. It's nodding it down. Thank you so much, Geshe-la. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Take care, everyone. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye, Geshe-la.
Bye.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us on this beautiful Sunday. And if you wanted to hear more about Geshe-la, Geshe-la, one of her students, she is way too humble to do that, but one of her students made a website for her, not for her, but to collect all her many teachings all around the world. So I think it's basically kelsangwangmo.com. Please have a look, and there you will find many resources. So Geshe-la has been giving, I think since 2013, 2-week courses at Tushita, like advanced courses, quite intense courses with many hours of teachings and meditations every day. Where she is teaching all kinds of topics, from bodhicitta and mind and mental factors and what we call an FPMT basic program. So if you're interested in that, all the recordings are on that website. Geshe-la is teaching extensively online right now, for the Dharma friends in Israel right now. I could see a few there. I think I saw Leora, and thank you so much. We have Sunday evening class soon again. So there is a lot of things happening. So just have a look on YouTube and on her website, and there you can find many hours of teachings. And she's of course my big heroine, a great role model. Those of you who joined for Jitsuma's talk on Friday, she is amazing role model, and Geshe-la is another one who, the first female Geshe, and for us Western women, I think she's especially inspiring. Not just, of course, she has amazing knowledge, but also she's a very humble and kind person. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a beautiful Sunday, and tomorrow we have another day of miracle coming up. Amazing, with Geshe Laktola. So Geshe Laktola is the director of the Tibetan Library of Works and Archives. A very honorable, Geshe-la, and we have him for 2 days on meditation and mindfulness, I think. Yes, so tomorrow, 4 o'clock Indian time, we will welcome Geshe Laktola. Please join. Geshe-la is amazing in his own right. He was the translator of His Holiness the Dalai Lama for 17 years. He knows our Western Indian mind as much as the Tibetan one, and he is very funny as well. He has a great sense of humor and is very down to earth, and very much straight to the point. So please join us tomorrow. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye-bye. Have a good evening, good morning in Americas, good afternoon. And thank you so much, Venerable Sayana, and thank you so much. Where is our Portuguese translator?
Jenny.
Yes, Jenny. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it in Portuguese. Thank you so much. Very kind joining us and providing this great service. Thank you. Bye-bye. Jenny. Nandro's laughing. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Pamela. Thank you for our great director and tech person and so many other functions in one. Many labels on a great basis.